All right, thanks for joining today on Reduce Cyber Risk. And we're going to go over a few things in today's episode, and basically going to be getting into around security news, and we're going to have some great stuff on cybersecurity for business, and we're going to get into some training that deals around the CISSP. The good thing with the training is that even if you are an individual who is not looking for your CISSP, this will be great information that you can utilize for your business to protect it from the best way you possibly can. And this, you'll get yourself a security person in a box. That's kind of the plan, at least. I don't know. We'll see. So as far as cybersecurity news for the past couple of days, it's been a little bit of a calm time for me during the holidays. So we're going to kind of catch up on some back stuff, and you'll see some more of these episodes coming out over the next couple of weeks. But there was some recent security flaws that came out with ABB safety PLCs. And you're probably going, what is that? If you're not familiar with the manufacturing space, you'll be dealing, they are, what an ABB is, they're a company that works in programmable logic controllers, and they deal with systems that are, basically they connect. They're like small little operating systems that are connected to manufacturing systems. And what happens is this PLC is a programmable logic controller, and in many cases, they have like XP or even Windows 7 systems that are actually operating systems that are incorporated within the PLC. And these systems run autonomous. That's the whole purpose behind them. The question comes into, though, is that sometimes they don't always get the same kind of security updates that you would like to see from a normal operating system. And it's because they are sitting in the manufacturing or the business or the processing space, in that they are, if you've got let's just say, I don't know, a printing press, and this printing press on it has these various sensors, and these various sensors are connected, do certain things. And I shouldn't say the sensors do, but the manufacture, these arms, let's just say it's got an arm of a printing press, and it does certain tasks. Well, each of these tasks has a little computer, which is a programmable logic controller. And this controller will make these arms do specific things. Well, the thing is in the past, these have been pretty much a standalone system. They were connected through wired connections. They are becoming more and more wireless. But the thing around that is they don't always get updated the way they should. Well, there's a recent, and so therefore, since they need the software to be updated with the goal of protecting, right, of protecting the systems, and you wouldn't want them to get infiltrated by hackers. You also don't want to have the ability to support them long term. This has been an ongoing challenge over the past few years. Well, basically since they started putting computers on these automated systems. And so now you're seeing these PLCs just throughout manufacturing environments a lot. They're everywhere. So one of the main companies is a company called ABB. And it's a Swiss industrial tech company, and they provide these PLCs. And there's also other companies out there, Honeywell and so forth, will provide these same type of programmable logic controllers. But what had happened is that there's a gateway that they have that's called the gateway, or the Gate EI Echo 1 and Gate Echo 2. These gateways were basically allowed to communicate with other systems, and that's what these specific gateways are for. Well, what had happened is there's an issue with them that it was causing them to have some challenges. Well, what ABB, they have a safety system. So even on, like in the manufacturing, to get a little more context, manufacturing, you may have the PLCs that are connected, operating within the manufacturing area, and then you also have a safety system as well. And these safety systems it's like a redundant type of system, and they're designed so that in the event that there is a runaway condition, the safety systems will kick in and protect people and the facility from certain doom. Okay, so with that, we don't want the doom part. But what happened is they found that this gateway had some issues, and so therefore it could be exploited. Well, you don't want your safety system to be exploited. That would be bad. Hence, the situation is that things could get really ugly real quick. So what it was allowing to do is it was allowing them to be exploited remotely over the network. So from a manufacturing standpoint, anything that's in that world, you don't really want it connected to the business network. So you have two networks. You have your process network and you have your business network. You really don't want the manufacturing side the process side to be connected to the business side. One, it causes issues in the fact that there could be conflict. Like say, for instance, you've got a scan that's going on within the business network that hits your process network. Well, these PLCs are not designed as robust as a desktop system that sits in your business network. Well, if they get scanned, that can cause some challenges, right? That can cause them basically to hiccup and tip over. We don't want that. That would be bad. So therefore, it's a good idea to separate these networks as well. Well, if one, so the reason I was going down this path is because if the network is together and you now have someone who can remote into this system, well, this gateway allowed someone within the same network to be able to remote into it and then cause issues with it. Well, if someone can remote into this PLC from the business network, that's not a good thing at all. There's processes on how to do that, and you would have a remote box that you would potentially, like a jump box that you would get into, and then from there you would connect into this PLC or into the safety system. That's the proper way of doing something like that, and it's properly segregated. But allowing it to directly remote in from the business network, that's not a good option. So highly recommend that if you do have ABB in your environment, you look for ways to upgrade the system as best you can. If there's patches out there, you need to look at fixing that. At the time when I read the article, there hadn't been anything yet, but that's very possible they have that fixed by now since it's been a couple weeks. But again, what's causing this is a lack of authentication support, which is typical for PLCs because they're designed, because they don't have a lot of memory on these programmable logic controllers. They keep them pretty slim, and they're an operating system that is cut way back just to the bare essentials. And so to have authentication support may not necessarily be one of the things that they're thinking of. Now, the one thing I would say around these vendors is they're having to take notice of this. One, there's regulations that are coming down forcing them to do this, but also it's just there's liability reasons around it as well. They no longer can just kind of throw stuff out there and say, well, we don't support it. You get what you get because it is what it is. Well, and that's really not really that good English. But the cool part about that, though, is that now that there's more visibility into these systems, there's getting more and more people that are taking focus of it. So therefore, hopefully they'll be pushing out better patching and better management of these systems. So if you've got ABB PLCs that are in your environment, just make sure you look and see what you can do to potentially upgrade this, especially as it relates in this vulnerability to the gateways that affect their PLCs. All right. There's also some medical breaches that have been occurring recently, and I'm not going into the gory details around it, but medical breaches will continue to be a hot topic for 2019, as this is a brand new year that we're coming into. And one thing about this is that in the University of Vermont, had 32,000 patients had their information compromised or basically disclosed. That's not good. The interesting part about all this is the hackers, the people that are involved with these kind of things, they are typically looking for information that they can sell on the dark web. Now, in the past, it's been, people were looking for as much information as you possibly can, try to sell it on the dark web, make some money. The personal information in today's world, because there's so much of this data out there for everybody, the amount of money isn't that significant that you can make per record anymore. I know that if you have to have like everything about an individual to include social security number, the last numbers I had seen were around $25 per record if you have a full up social security number along with anything else that may go along, either name, date of birth, located address, all those things that could create the ability for you to have identity theft or identity fraud. So therefore, it's not as lucrative as it used to be. However, in today's world, I mean, coming from my perspective of being a hacker for the government for many years, the one thing that you like to do is that, not that we did this, is that you'd steal as much information as you possibly could. And in the process of stealing the information, you'd glean from it what you felt was valuable and what you didn't think was valuable. And so therefore, a lot of these breaches may never end up being anything, just because someone got access and decided just to steal as much as they could and then figure out what kind of information they had later. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Now, Dallas-Fort Worth, their CCRM facility, it's a fertility clinic that was also exposed a while back. It's really a little unclear as far as the scope of that, but if you are in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and you utilize that clinic, you might want to know that someone may have gotten your information. So between the University of Vermont and the Dallas-Fort Worth CCRM, there's some few breaches in the medical side of the house that have been in the news. All right, so let's move on to some security stuff for your business. All right, so if you've got a small or medium-sized business, you probably are struggling with security. Or if you're not struggling with security, you might be thinking, I'm not going to worry about it. But that's a bad idea. I would not recommend that. You can do that, but there's some downsides for that, but which we'll go in through Reduce Cyber Risk. We'll go through a lot of those in detail on numerous days. There's a partnership now between Untangle and Malwarebytes. Now, a little backstory about Untangle. Untangle deals with a next-generation firewall. So you got your Barracudas and your, I was going to say Fortnite, but Fortnite is not a firewall. It would be a Fortinet would be a good firewall to look at when you're dealing with that, or Palo Altos. But Untangle has the capability has a next-generation firewalls. Well, what they've done is these next-generation firewalls also communicate through the cloud. All the companies nowadays, I shouldn't say all, is probably not the right term to utilize and throw everybody in the same bucket, but many of these firewall companies have a cloud capability where they all talk back to. It's like the central brain. Well, they have Untangle and Malwarebytes have teamed up because Malwarebytes is a endpoint product that focuses on malware protection from Trojans to ransomware, you name it, right? So they are the endpoint of these systems. Well, they teamed up with Untangle to work through to basically communicate between the firewall and the endpoint. Now, from a security standpoint, what's been in the past is these individual vendors, from firewall vendors to intrusion prevention vendors, to you name it, they've all have been their own individual product. They've said they've done some integration, and they do integration, especially when you're dealing with an enterprise. However, the one thing that has been missing for small and medium-sized businesses has been the integration between these various systems. And it just really comes down to there's really not as much of a market there. And so therefore, what ends up happening is people go, well, if there's not a market, these companies will go for the main enterprises and not the small and medium-sized businesses. But this partnership now is where they're integrating the Malwarebytes endpoints into Untangle's ecosystem that deals with next-generation firewalls. So what it's allowing them to do is it's allowing IT administrators, which may be the owner of the small business, right? If you small business out there owners, you're probably going, yeah, that's right. It allows the IT administrators to have visibility into the networks. Now, you may want to, if you're a small business owner, you may even have this outsourced to a third party. If you do, this would give them potential access into this as well. The third party might actually be looking to offer this as a service to you. But the one interesting part is that this is something out there that they've made available because they see a market and they see a need. So I think it's a really good partnership. I haven't gone into the gory details around it other than to see the press release that came out. So I've heard of Untangle, not as much as I've heard of Malwarebytes, obviously, but it's a great opportunity if you are a small business to allow you to get some integration between devices and services within your business, within the security world. All right, NIST also put out on a different note. NIST came out with a Small Business Security Act. I was not aware of this at all, and it came out in August of 2018. Now, what it does is it provides resources for small business, and it basically provides guidelines on how to secure your small business. So it's a little backstory. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, was originally designed for the DoD, and it was designed as a way to help the DoD get some level of standardization. Okay, moving on to the next topic, the NIST, Small Business Cybersecurity Act. This came out in August of 2018, and honestly, I was not aware that it actually even came out. What it does is it provides resources for small businesses and basically guidelines for them on how to operate and manage security as it relates to their business. Now, if you're not in some backstory around NIST, NIST is a National Institute for Standards and Technology, and they came out originally for protecting the DoD, the Department of Defense. The purpose behind that was that they needed some level of standardization around how they do business. And the NIST has been around for not just cybersecurity, it's been for a long time, just around DoD in general. Well, NIST has a lot of great publications out there around cybersecurity that can help you. And so I'd highly recommend it if you're a small or medium-sized business, you check out that capability and see what's there and available to you. If you have a third-party vendor, what you can do if you're evaluating third-party vendors, I would actually recommend that you quiz them on this, ask them what are they using to manage your network and how are they understanding the best practices around your network, and that would come down to these security best practices from NIST would be a good place to start. However, the one thing that I see as a downside to this is not the fact that it's some great product, but it's voluntary. I am not a big proponent of regulation. I think there are times when regulation is needed, but for the most part, I think the U.S. government needs not to necessarily be in everybody's chili, and I think that comes down to any government, is when these people start getting, the government gets over-regulatory, and it ends up causing some challenges. We've seen this with just the voluminous amounts of regulations that are in the United States that some people adhere to, some people don't, and it's also very challenging, and it costs a lot of money for all of these regulations. Not saying that they're not all needed. There are many that are needed, one, to protect people and to protect resources. However, there's a lot of them that are not. So in the case of this, though, so I say all that to come back to this point, is that it is not regulatory, it's not mandatory that small, medium businesses follow this. So therefore, what's going to happen is because it's voluntary, the challenges that will come into it, many will not even look at it. And so there has to be some sort of fine line or balance between this, in that unless it's mandatory or it's regulatoryized. That's not the right word. I know I can't speak English very good as I'm recording this at 5 o'clock in the morning. But they don't have regulatory requirements around it. The big issue comes into is that unless there's some regulatory situation that is sort of pushing people in this direction, people just won't pay attention to it. So what's going to happen is, again, many small and medium-sized businesses, unless you really truly, have you been burned before, you've been hacked, or you are more on a early adopter, you probably won't be looking much at this capability. So therefore, it's important that some level of regulatory requirements almost needs to be implemented in some way to help with giving some more guidance to these small and medium businesses around security. So something to consider around that. Don't know what will happen of it, but if you are a small, medium-sized business or you're evaluating a third party to look at or to handle security for you, this is a really good thing to consider, is taking a look at what NIST put out from their Small Business Cybersecurity Act. All right, let's move on to some training we got around for reduced cyber risk. Now, I'm going to go into a couple different areas around as it relates to the CISSP. And the reason I say that is because I've got CISSP courses that I'm putting out, but the main thing is that I want to kind of get the information. I'm going to go from a reduced cyber risk piece of this. This training is going to focus on what are some key aspects that you need to be aware of. One, is a small, medium-sized business owner, also as a person who's looking for their CISSP, which will helps a person's security future and helps you move on in your security world. So this is going to be some really good information that can help you with that. So again, this is very beneficial for business owners as well as security professionals. All right, so we're going to get into confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now, over the overview, secrecy of data is basically around data not being disclosed or available to people to see, and that's the confidentiality aspects of this. And what you want is only authorized people to have access, which is like, duh, right? You only want people that have authorized access. You don't want unauthorized people to have access. Well, that's where confidentiality comes into play as well. You want the people that have the rights to have the access, and you want the people that need the information to have the information. So that's the key thing around the confidentiality. So as we're going to get into confidentiality, we want to talk about maintained and the data maintained, as well as how the data is potentially compromised. So confidentiality maintained, which is basically saying that you have disk encryption, okay? So you have encryption in place that is protecting your information. So whether that is well, you have device encryption that's on your hard drive, that you have encryption in place that is going from your point to point from your tunnels. So you have one server talking to another server that is encrypted. So that would be SSL for having secure communications with the internet. Could be having an IPsec tunnel, which is basically a communication between one server and the next server. So again, do you have encryption that is set up that's resident on the device, as well as encryption that is set up that is communicating from point to point? Another option is password storage and vaults. Do you have various locations that you store your passwords in? And I don't recommend you store them in your email. Now, I had a friend of mine that is a manager at a bank that is a local bank, and I made the comment to him, they're doing some upgrades on their passwords, and I saw that, and I said, hey, that's cool. I said, so you guys store all your passwords in like a password vault, which would be something like CyberArk or something along those lines. And he goes, no, he says, I secure them in a really safe spot. And I said, well, that's awesome. Where's this safe spot that you store your passwords in? And he goes, I store them in my email. And I almost fell over. I'm like, you store your passwords in your email? I go, yeah. And I go, don't you think it's a little insecure? And he goes, well, then I have the best access to them. I'm like, dude, that ain't good. So we had a little education on that. But bottom line is, do you store your passwords in a secure environment? It could be a password vault like LastPass or CyberArk. It could be an Excel spreadsheet. I wouldn't recommend it, but it could be. But at least the spreadsheet would then be potentially protected with a password as well. So that's confidentiality maintained. Access controls, these are folders, applications, or any place where data is stored and transmitted. Those would have access controls, and it would allowing information in or out. So again, that's important as well, to have these controls in place. That's confidentiality maintained. Now, when your confidentiality is compromised, so those are examples of how to keep it, is when your data is shipped in plain text or stored unprotected. So this kind of comes back to the encryption piece of this. If you ship your data just over the wire, no encryption, no protection, that would be compromising your confidentiality. Also, not storing it encrypted on a hard drive or a USB stick, that would be compromising your confidentiality. So those are key things that you would not want to do. Passwords being shared or stored on unprotected files, that would be bad. You don't want to do that. Now, there might be times when you have to do this. And so, again, you have to take a risk-based approach with how you manage cyber risk within your organization. And there may be cases where you just have to deal with it. You have to suck it up, buttercup, right? So, if that's the case, then but you know the risk that you're accepting for your business. Another one where confidentiality would be compromised is where everyone has access to files and folder structures without an audit being done. Everyone, quote unquote, everyone, that's bad. You don't want everyone to have access to file and folder structures unless you have to, right? This comes back to the first part. If it's just basic data and you really don't care, well, great, more power to you. You have everyone on it. But if you have any level of regulatory requirements or any sort of security concerns like intellectual property protection, whatever it is, the everyone is not necessarily a good option. Just telling you, just saying. Also, employees that are socially engineered, they click on a link that allows unauthorized access. That right there would be your confidentiality compromised. So those are key pieces where that would cause you issues with confidentiality. As it relates to integrity, okay, the key thing around this is that integrity is completely dependent upon the confidentiality of the data. So confidentiality is important, integrity work hand in hand. And this is maintaining assurances around the accuracy and completeness of the data. That's from the beginning to the end. That's the life cycle of it. So that the data from the beginning to the end is accurate and complete. That's how it's, integrity. It's good, right? You want that. right? All right, so and data cannot be modified or unauthorized in an undetected manner. So what you don't want is you don't want to have a data packet that is intercepted that potentially could have been modified. And the other thing that comes into this is from a former military background, psychological operations. I kind of use this as a primer around this situation, as a primer as I talk about psychological operations and how FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, can cause some challenges, especially in the cyber world. One example of that would be during 2003, I think it was when the NASDAQ, I think it was NASDAQ. Yeah, pretty sure. No, it was a stock exchange. And what had happened was Al-Qaeda had made the comment in 2003 that they could hack the U.S. stock exchange. Well, just by making that comment, stock market dropped 300 points. Okay, so and back then it wasn't up to 27,000 or whatever it is today. It was a lower number. So that 300 point shift was significant. And just because they said that they could hack it, they didn't mean that they actually could. They just said it. So that's when the fear, uncertainty, and doubt come into play and cause people to make reactions to it. Well, if you can't trust the data that's coming and going from your network, then that would cause FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And so therefore you'd have some challenges. So again, that's where I kind of use that as an example of how you can't, if it's could potentially be modified or unauthorized in an undetected manner. Assurance or process to ensure proper change of the data. So you have a process to ensure the data is changed in a way that maintains the integrity of the data, right? Changes can occur, but it has to be in a proper format. Now, so as integrity maintained, there are some security mechanisms that must be in place to make sure the data is not compromised, which would be encryption would be good, right? At transit and in rest. So if the data is being moved to and from and you know you've got encryption and no one has your keys, well, then you can feel confident that the data will not be molested in any form or shape. You have proper access provided to the data via authentication procedures. So you're keeping the unauthorized people out and the authorized people in and allowing access to the data. So again, you have a procedure in place to manage the information. That is everything. And then finally, you have some level of oversight or audit that will then ensure that the proper access is being granted. And this would be hopefully an automated system. And as well, you would have some level of logging and monitoring in place to verify and validate that the right people are getting the information that they need. So again, that's integrity maintained. Now, integrity compromise would be kind of what it was with confidentiality. It's transmitted, or data is transmitted or stored in an unprotected container or without encryption. Again, wide open and free to get molested. Not good. Inadequate authentication methods in place. So you basically don't have the right authentication to allow people access to the information. And therefore, the everyone group becomes more of an issue. So if you have the everyone group set up and you know that everyone has access to this bucket of data, how do you know they didn't mess with it? How do you know someone didn't copy it, didn't delete it, didn't do something else? So again, that's bad. You want to make sure you have proper authentication mechanisms in place. And then finally, systems are not logged or monitored to ensure the integrity of the data. Again, if you can't trust the data, it's pretty hard to ensure that you are utilizing the most current and up-to-date information. Now, availability of the data. So we're on the CIA triangle. We are on number 3 of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So authorized items are granted timely and uninterrupted access. That's availability. So you don't want the stray backhoe that takes out your fiber. You want them to be up and operational. And as Amazon AWS will mention multiple times, they do 99% with like 13 nines of availability. So it's an important part. Another thing around high availability, that means you have redundant systems in place to maintain the availability of the system or the data at all times. As an example, you may have multiple firewalls in place that one can fail over in the event of a failure. That would be high availability. So it must be available at all times. It also must include efficient, uninterrupted access, which would be the prevention of a denial of service attack. And this denial of service attack could be from external entities as well as internal entities. You could have a scanner that's in your environment that is scanning ports. Well, if it's scanning ports that are in your environment and it causes all this traffic to go over the internal network, well, as we talked about earlier with the ABB PLCs, PLCs do not react well to scans, and therefore what will happen is they will turn around and tip over, and they do unprofessional things in the event of being scanned. So that would cause a denial of service internally. An external would be somebody attacking you and trying to shove gobs of data at your website to shut it down. So again, that's denial of service. Now these are intentional and unintentional. Like I mentioned, with the unintentional, you're dealing with the scan that happens in your network. The intentional would be somebody not liking you and scanning you from the outside. Availability maintained. This would be that the power is maintained and kept available at all times. This would be an uninterrupted power sources. UPSs is what they're called. They're keeping power on your environment. And that would be that if you have a blip in the power grid and all of a sudden things start acting weird, the UPS will kick on and make sure that it stays operational. They're just big batteries in many cases. Or they can be a generator that would be in place to ensure that if you had an outage, the generator could be operational. So those are around power maintained. You have high availability systems and devices. There's hardware in place that will ensure the systems stay operational in the event of a failure. So again, we talked about with the firewalls. Do you have multiple devices in place to manage those firewalls in the event they tip over, right? And then finally, this is one that is so often looked, and I'm guilty of this more than anybody as well, is that don't have policies and procedures in place. Do you have a disaster recovery or business continuity policy in place with a testing plan to be operational in the event things go wonky, they go sideways? It's really important to do this. It is. And I recommend that you have policies and procedures, guidelines, all of those things, but keep it simple, stupid. Keep it simple, foolish person. So you want to make sure that you have those in place. And then you also don't want to have, you don't necessarily have to have all of these disaster recovery plans for every system. Focus on critical business systems. That's a great way to reduce your cyber risk. And then finally, availability compromised. What does that mean? Well, we talked about a denial of service attack. That right there is availability compromised. Whether it's internal or external, that causes you issues. Yeah, that's not good. Not good at all. And then critical systems being unavailable. If you have your main systems that you require for your business to operate and they're down, well, that's not good. And so therefore your availability can be compromised with that. So again, we talked about confidentiality, integrity, and availability and how to best protect your networks.